Hey, how are ya?
Hey, I am doing very well. I am currently at the beach, enjoying a week off, and it has been just perfect. Like back where I live, it's been more like 85, 95 degrees, somewhere in there over the last 10, 12 days. And at the beach, it's a wonderful 55 to 65, and I just love it. It's just the right temperature, the right setting. It's so relaxing here. I feel great.
Oh man, 55 to 65? That sounds incredible. Uh,
Yes.
that just
Yeah.
sounds absolutely stunning. It is a balmy 93 degrees here right now with a heat advisory.
Yeah. Because what's the heat index?
I honestly don't know off the top of my head, but bad.
Yeah. That's the thing I did not
Yeah.
like about Missouri is all the humidity. We just don't have as much humidity out here. And then when you get to the coast, you get that marine layer that just like nestles everything in, and you're so protected from all that heat and nastiness.
That's so nice. Yeah. I just pulled it up and it says, on the app, it says humidity and it says 45%. And then in parentheses, very humid. Oh, thanks. I didn't know that 45% humid was very humid. It's so bad. We need to make sure we tell you it's bad.
That's awesome.
Great. So apparently it's very humid here.
Okay. Yeah, the internet told you so. It can't be wrong.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, AccuWeather. This week's non-sponsor.
You could list any brand and it would be a non-sponsor, but whatever.
Yeah, it's true. But this week, our non-sponsor is AccuWeather, my personal favorite weather app.
All right. How are you doing besides being a bad spokesman for companies that don't pay us?
Oh man, I'm doing great. I really like to cook, and my current schedule allows me to kind of put some time into cooking. And so last night I made pork chops, and I had the time to do all the steps the way that you're supposed to. So like I cooked them in a skillet. Had the time to just sort of get the outside to a really beautiful golden brown, time to baste butter onto it. I was, put the whole skillet in the oven to like finish the cook. I mean, I just really, I had the time to do it right. And it came out so good. They were so good. So I'm doing awesome because I love the experience of cooking well.
Wow. I love eating good food, but I have realized I don't love to cook. I don't mind it at times. I can do it, but yeah, I don't enjoy the process like you do.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. Like, I have realized, like, I will take the time to research. Okay, the last time I cooked pork chops, they were good, but I want them to be great. What do I have to do differently? And that's where you end up with like all the little steps and whatever, and seasoning it just so, and making sure, it's crazy to me. I don't like cleaning up after I cook. I don't think any human being likes that, but I do love to cook.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. But I'm guessing this is not the On the Phone with Josh cooking show. I'm guessing there's something else that you were wanting to talk about. I'm curious what it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed our conversation last week about
Mm.
the beginnings of answering the question, how do we go about acquiring Christian character? And specifically as it relates to pastors or elders, how someone qualifies themselves, how someone acquires the characteristics that Paul requires of pastors and elders. And so it's one thing to say you must be this way. It's a whole nother thing to say, how you actually become that type of a person. And I really enjoyed where we started that conversation last week and the groundwork we've laid. But it seems to me that kind of the next phase is to go read a bunch of experts. And since you are in a doctoral program all about character formation and soul care, I would love to just talk with you a little bit about who are some of these experts? Who have you read? Who do you think we should read? How do we build out a library of really wise voices that will help us acquire Christian character? I hope you have a
Yeah,
list.
I do have a list. As a matter of fact, I keep right next to me I have a bookshelf, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but the top shelf is literally set aside for my favorite reads. So less than a third of the shelf is taken, and it is everything from fiction to leadership to spiritual formation to whatever, but it is my favorites. So the first thing I had to do was just look over to my left and look at my top shelf books on spiritual formation. But then I have some other ones as well, but I'm hoping you also have some because it's not like you haven't read in this arena. You have read quite a bit in this arena.
Yeah, it's funny. Yes, I have, but I'm really stuck on this one question. Like, how does one qualify as a pastor slash elder spiritually? And I don't know that I've read all of these books with that exact question in mind. I've learned a lot from these authors, but I almost feel like any book I reference, I'm going to need to reread in light of my present question.
Oh, I totally get this. Isn't it fascinating? I heard somebody one time joke about the fact that reading is a profoundly interactive experience because obviously what is the book talking back or something? But this right, but it is because the question that you come to the book with profoundly determines what you get from the book.
Yes. Yeah. No, 100%. In fact, that's actually one of the contributions to biblical scholarship that has come over the last half century or so as the reader has been acknowledged as a part of the process of biblical interpretation. Because yes, what you come to the Bible with, what questions, what issues, what understanding you approach the Bible with has a profound impact on what meaning you derive from it. And so that's true in the Bible, but it's also obviously true in any author you read.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was intrigued to learn about, actually, in this exact vein, I was hearing two authors talk. Okay, so this is one of my favorite podcasts. I've listened to it for years. It's my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson, one of his best friends, who's also an author, Dan Wells. They both have taught literature at a college level. And so they were talking about this before this infiltrated kind of biblical scholarship. It was just there in literature. And they talked about, and tell me if you've heard this language because I find this fascinating. They talked about the fact that some texts are readerly texts, meaning the onus of interpretation leans more towards the reader, and other texts are more writerly texts, meaning the onus of the text leans more towards the writer. So, for example, poetry tends to be more readerly. What you bring to the text is intentionally at the forefront.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're reading a cookbook, it really matters less what you're bringing to the text. And there's, right? Like, and there's a spectrum there. And I find it fascinating. Not only do we all bring something to all texts, but different types of texts engage differently with what we're bringing.
Wow. I had not even thought about that, which is really interesting when we think about the different genres of the Bible. Like you already mentioned poetry. Well, there you go. You're going to bring a lot to the Psalms that and interpretive wise than maybe you bring to, say, Paul. That's That's really interesting.
Isn't it? And I do think we do this. And I think that, for example, the Psalms do make more room for a readerly text, right? Like there's a lot of space for me in the Psalms. And
Yeah.
good gracious, if you read Paul or the Gospels with that same attitude, we will call it eisegesis.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
So, but, but, so I, first of all, I totally agree. And I'm intrigued. Not only some of these books that are on my list, at least, are books I haven't read in the last, some of them, I bet it was 10 years ago when I read them.
Mm.
Most of them are more recent, but like, the first book on my list, if I can jump into the list, is that okay?
Oh, 100%. Please.
So I told this story, I think, on the podcast recently, didn't I? About how when I was pastoring and I had that first meeting with somebody who was kind of beyond the spiritual basics, and I called my dad and was like, Dad, I don't know how to disciple this person. They already read their Bible and pray. What do I do?
Mm.
And so, being a good consumer Christian, the next thing that I did was go to christianbook.com and order the top 10 titles on discipleship in order to you know, try to consume as much content as possible on discipleship as quickly as possible. And what was fascinating to me about the books that I got was that 9 of them were one person's experience that they were trying to universalize to the church at large. Here's what worked for me. I'm sure it'll work for you too.
Mm.
And then there was that one other book, which was Greg Hawkins and Callie Parkinson's Move. And it is the compilation of the data from the original Reveal study done by Willow Creek, where they studied 1,000 churches and they broke down all the Christian practices that they could think of into 3 basic categories: beliefs, private practices, and corporate practices. And they asked, of this list of the things in all 3 of these different categories, and they explain in the book how they break this down or whatever, but if we generally break things down to non-believer, new believer, young adult believer, and mature believer, so there's kind of those 4 categories, what beliefs, private practices, and public practices tend to move people from A to B, from B to C, and from C to D?
Mm.
And they checked with 1,000 churches. And then, I mean, Reveal has been going on now for decades. And so now it's like tens of thousands of churches. But that is still the one book from that early list that I think this is a book that is worth reading about how to help someone become elder material, because it answers the question from a research perspective. Here are the things that actually help kind of mid maturity believers become mature believers. Fascinating idea.
Absolutely. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you happen to remember any of the practices that they recommend?
Well, I don't actually remember them, but I do have the kind of summary graphic in front of me. And they describe what I kind of called mid maturity as close to Christ. And they describe kind of fully mature as Christ centered. And so movement 3 is what they describe as going from close to Christ centered. And the beliefs and attitudes that move you from 3 to 4 are a belief in giving away my life, a belief that Christ is first, a belief in my identity in Christ, and a belief in the authority of the Bible. Interestingly enough, the organized church activities that tend to move somebody from 3 to 4 are serving those in need through my church and attending additional teaching and worship services. Oh, and I should add the private practices are reflection on scripture as opposed to Bible reading, or excuse me, in addition to Bible reading. So you read the Bible daily and you reflect on the Bible daily.
Hmm.
Tithing, solitude, prayer of confession of sins, journaling, and prayer of seeking guidance.
Okay.
So a lot in there. Um, and you could probably unpack that by itself like for hours. But I find that to be a really interesting approach.
Yeah, it is, and I think it sounds like a great book. My concern with it is a very similar concern that I had to the book Gospel Eldership that I reflected on last week, which it can feel like a list of have tos or a list of do this
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. Whereas I think there are some other authors that do a really good job at digging deeper into the heart language out of which flows all of those action steps. And for me, one of the best authors that does that is Ruth Haley Barton. And
Ooh.
I just feel like anything she's ever written deserves a spot on this list. For instance, I remember picking up Ruth Haley Barton's book, Sacred Rhythms, Arranging Our Lives for Spiritual Transformation. I picked this book up probably 10 or 15 years ago and read the introduction / first chapter. And I think somewhere in there, the introduction, first chapter, somewhere in there, she basically said, this is going to require a lot of you. This is going to require your heart to be in the right place. And if you're not there, you need to stop reading this book. It's not going to be helpful. Don't pick this up until you're ready. And I was like, okay, I'm not ready. I don't know. I don't remember what space I was in at the time. I just knew whatever she was asking of me, my heart wasn't there to do. Like, okay, I'm not going to get anything out of this book. So I set it down, and I probably only picked it up 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and read it and loved it. I was in a much different place and got a lot more out of it than I ever would have otherwise. So I really appreciate authors that can really get down into that level. And then all of those action steps that are suggested by that MOVE survey, you can adopt them from a different heart posture rather than I must, I have to, this is what it takes to grow. This is what it takes to look good. This is what it takes to be good. I must. Ruth Haley Barton and many other authors like her do a good job of saying it's not about the doing, it's about doing from a particular heart posture, and let's work on that for a bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. First of all, I think we're going to find that a number of these authors, it's the author that matters more than the particular book. Does that seem true to you?
Yeah.
Most of I would put Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Haley Barton on any leadership list ever. And like you, I would read anything that she wrote because she is one of the handful of people who does a great job at this exact thing that you're talking about. They are invitational authors. It feels to me when I read some of these folks, I'm being invited into a bigger and better world.
Yeah.
And there is something free and open and spacious about what I'm being. And for me, another one of these folks, and I quote this book almost every time I talk about leadership in a church context. Eugene Peterson has to be on that list.
Mm.
When I read Peterson, I love Jesus more and am my heart is awakened. And particularly his book, and two of his books make my top list, but the one that is number one for me is The Contemplative Pastor, which I absolutely love. And I can't remember. Have you read this one?
I have not. It's been on my to read list for a very long time. I know you read it and loved it. We even had a podcast conversation where I got to just
Oh,
listen to
yeah,
you
that's right.
reflect on it, but I still haven't read it for myself.
I get it. As much as I love Ruth Haley Barton, I still have not read Sacred Rhythms. I think I've read every other book she's ever written, but I haven't read that one. I totally get it. But yeah, Contemplative Pastor just does that same thing of like making, and again, these authors often are very practical, but practical in a very inviting way.
Yes.
And I'm curious, do you have other books on your list that sort of fall into that category of books that make me want to grow, that sort of awaken that longing?
It's curious because there are books that affect me in different ways, right? There are books that invite that sense of being on a journey, keep growing. Like the one of the phrases that it sticks out for me from another author, C.S. Lewis, comes from the Last Battle, when the children have crossed over and they're entering the heavenly kingdom, and Aslan just awaits way out in front of them and keeps inviting the children to come further up and further in, further up and
Mm-hmm.
further in. And that has been a little mantra in my brain ever since I read those lines that help inspire spiritual growth. And so, yeah, there are authors that inspire me that way. And then there are authors that inspire me intellectually. Like we spent a lot of time, you and I, on this podcast talking about Miroslav Volf's Exclusion and Embrace. And that was a highly rigorous intellectual exercise going through his book. And hopefully we made that a little more accessible in our reflections on it on the podcast. But either way, the process we went through really stimulated my intellectual curiosity and invited me to see Jesus as a crucified Messiah. And the fact that to follow Jesus, whatever else it means, whatever else spiritual growth might mean or what have you, I am trying to emulate a crucified Messiah. This requires sacrifice. It's built into the system. So that was a challenge rather than a emotional stirring. It was a challenge. It was an intellectual realization. There was a depth of knowledge that came from that produced a strong conviction that guides other aspects of how I go about this.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing that for me, Wolf has to be on my list. I'm not saying that everybody should read him, but the book Exclusion and Embrace, I think, offers a profound corrective to the way that we as evangelicals think of spiritual growth. I think we are profoundly self centered in the way that we think about maturity and growth. It's about me being more like Jesus, as opposed to, Paul in First Timothy is this wonderful verse where in First Timothy 1:5 he says, "The aim of our charge, that is the command that I'm giving you, the reason I'm giving you these commands, is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith." If the aim of spiritual growth is love, if that is one of the clear signs of maturity, I think there are few books that explore what it means to love people who are different than us better than Miroslav Volf.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's that self-sacrificial, open
Mm-hmm.
yourself to risk kind of love that Jesus demonstrates and Wolf brilliantly explores in his book.
So beautifully.
But
So beautifully.
But I have to say, when you talk about love and you talk about bringing others or the perspective of others into this, Robert Mulholland suddenly comes to mind. And
Hmm.
though I have not read his book yet, so I took a couple of spiritual formation classes in seminary, and Robert Mulholland's definition of spiritual formation was the definition adopted by those classes. And he says
Hmm.
it is the process of being formed in the image of Christ for the sake of others. The process of being
Hmm.
formed in the image of Christ for the sake of others. And I love the fact that he tags on for the sake of others, because just like you're talking about with Wolf, if we think that spiritual formation and growth and these characteristics of becoming an elder or pastor or whatever is just an exercise in personal gratification or personal growth or betterment, or whatever it is, if we're just thinking about it from an individual perspective, we've missed it. There
Hmm.
is there is something communal, there is something others centered in how we then show up in the world and benefit others through the character that has been given to us by imitating Christ.
Exactly. And this is, to your initial point about Wolf, the only thing that can make the cross make sense, right? Like there's an invitation in the epistles to emulate the cross. You're only
Mm,
going to do that for a reason. We are not sadistic.
sure. Sure.
And
Christ did that, yeah, for the sake of others.
right. And if he's doing it for the sake of others and going to those lengths for the sake of others, we are really, I think, responsible for doing the same thing and seeing the journey towards spiritual maturity in that exact same light. But if we're opening this to books we haven't read yet, there was a book, I don't know if we mentioned it and stop me if we did, but all through our conversation last time, the book that came to mind over and over again that I haven't read is Richard Foster's Learning Humility. Did
Oh,
we talk about that last time?
we did not. I'm super intrigued because A, I haven't heard of that book, and B, I am currently reading a Richard Foster book and getting a lot out of it.
I think Foster is amazing. And this is on my must read list because, I don't know if you've even seen the social media graphic that I put up for that particular episode. Um, but we talked a lot in that episode about the idea of needing to enter into leadership on your knees.
Yes.
And I am deeply caught by the fact that there aren't a wealth of books about how to embrace humility.
Hmm.
It's not a sexy topic. And I'm so grateful that someone like Foster, who has been in the spiritual formation universe for a very long time, this is his most recent book, I believe, just learning humility. Yes, I think every leader going into church leadership, pastor, elder, whatever, needs to be assigned a textbook like that, just as a way of saying, just so you know, this is what we're looking for.
Yeah, 100%. I'm excited to read that. I did not know it existed. That sounds exactly in line with some of the things that we talked about last week. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
yeah, I'm reading right now The Streams of Living Water that he
oh,
wrote many, many years ago. And I have not read this before. But what I'm appreciating about this is because when you talk about spiritual formation, so many of the authors that you're going to interact with come from the contemplative tradition, right? We're going
mhm.
to talk about Teresa of Avila, and we're going to talk about Saint John of the Cross, and Robert Mulholland even is a little bit more in that contemplative thing. It was even in the title of the Eugene Peterson book that
Yeah.
you referenced, The Contemplative Pastor. Right, this contemplative strand is very, very valuable for spiritual formation. But what I'm appreciating from Foster's book, The Streams of Living Water, he is evaluating all of the different streams that have affected Christianity over the years. And that's the contemplative is just one of them. He's also talking about the holiness movement, the evangelical movement, social justice, the charismatic, and what he calls the incarnational traditions. All of these traditions have something to offer us. And we all find ourselves in one or the other of these camps. And I think, you and I even bleed over into probably two or three of these camps. But I don't think any one Christian feels perfectly at home in any one of in all seven of these traditions. We have traditions that have influenced us, and we have others that have yet to influence us. And so as much as I want to learn from the contemplative tradition when it comes to spiritual formation, there are things I need to learn from all of these traditions, the holiness tradition being one of them. And so I was kind of convicted as I reflected last week on that book, Gospel Eldership. I felt like he was doing a lot of you should, you should, you should, you ought, you ought, you ought. But as I reflect on it, it's possible that author comes a little bit more from a holiness tradition and less a contemplative tradition. And I was upset with him because he wasn't bringing in the contemplative portions, that kind of heart-based stuff that Ruth Haley Barton is so good at. And if I just appreciate what he brings from his own tradition, from his own perspective, it's wonderful content. I want it to be more rounded. And if I want to be more rounded as a result, I need to learn from all seven of these different streams and traditions.
Yes, I love this idea because I think that we have to be intentional about knowing. Well, let me back up. Let me just be honest that when you brought up that book, I was like, man, I used to think that was awesome, and I'm just not sure about that. Are they all really fair thoughts? Like that was where my heart started as I was thinking it through. But as I bring myself back to, let's get really simple. It's about loving God and loving your neighbor, or about that verse that I read earlier. It's about being with God in the midst of whatever is going on in your life. Whatever language we want to use, if a person who is in the social justice tradition is most able to love God and love neighbor, most able to be with God in the midst of a fight for someone else's justice, that's awesome. And just as great as my 2 hours of silence in which I sit with Jesus or whatever, that's just kind of stereotyping the contemplative there,
Sure.
as much as
Yeah.
I'm stereotyping the social justice person. But I think you make a great point. And I think so often it is easy for us to assume our way is the right way rather than our way. This is where, again, I think there are a number of places where postmodernism offers the church a lot, and this is one of them. Jesus is the way. Contemplative prayer may be my way. Jesus is the way, but social justice is a way. And I'm not saying we don't have a lot to learn from one another. I should just kind of ghettoize myself in the way that's easy for me. I think there needs to be this balance of letting my soul be fed by the strand that comes easiest to me, while letting my soul be challenged by the strands that are most difficult for me.
Yes. Well, and to tie some loose ends together here, when we go back to Robert Mulholland's definition of spiritual formation, being formed in the image of Christ for the sake of others, you're automatically taking the social justice strand and the contemplative strand, and you're merging them into a really healthy whole, because it's for the sake of Christ, right? That's where you're spending your 2 hours in silence before a lit candle or something, but for the sake of others. And you rise from that prayer and you engage. I know social justice has its own baggage as a term, and so I don't want to like bring all of that baggage into this conversation, but at the end of the day, you're engaging for the sake of others, which can fit a definition of social justice.
Absolutely. Ultimately, I think you allow yourself in the challenging to engage in your contemplative practice for the sake of others, or to engage in your social justice practice for the sake of God, whichever challenge is perhaps more stretching for you.
That's good. Well, we're winding down on time. So rapid fire, who did we not get to that absolutely has to be mentioned in this conversation?
Oh my goodness, so many people. First of all, you mentioned her, but Interior Castle by Teresa of Avila has to be mentioned. It's one of the best stages of faith books I've ever read. I love, in terms of what happens in the person in order to make transformation happen, Minding the Heart by Robert Saucy is probably my top favorite, seconded by probably Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard. We haven't even mentioned Willard yet, and it would be a crime to do this podcast without mentioning Willard. I feel the same way about Kurt Thompson and The Anatomy of the Soul. Like, how do you possibly have this conversation and not say every leader must read Anatomy of the Soul, because you some kind of intersection of those three books allows you to like really get a grasp of what's going on in the person. And that is so important, because what the difference between a leader and everybody else is, you talked about how that eldership book, it made you feel like it was very proscriptive. Do this, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to know what's going on in the soul and how it works if we want to go from just growing ourselves to not accidentally doing things like that when we try to help other people grow.
Oh, yes. Yes. If we don't understand what's happening in our soul and how certain things hold us back, and how the process of letting go of those things actually works, how the process of embracing Christ actually works, if we don't understand the mechanics of the undoing of the self, then we are just going to be prescriptive for people. And we're going to put them in a place of shame and frustration and defeatism, because we haven't helped them actually do the work of growth.
Exactly. Well, I would say on the one hand, we will be prescriptive. And on the other hand, I think we will be painfully metaphorical. So we will say things. John Coe, the director of my Doctor of Ministry program, he always says the job of spiritual theology within the realm of theology as a whole is to ask, what does that actually look like? So phrases like in Christ or following Jesus are really great until you start asking, okay, but what does that actually look like in like everyday life? And I think knowing how the soul works helps us answer that what does that actually look like question, that pushes us to go beyond the metaphor to actual things actually happening.
Yes, yes, yes.
What about for you? I want to know, like, do you have any other books on your rapid fire must list?
Well, okay, so I totally agree with your list. I would add to that. So one of the books that we had to read in one of my, I took a spiritual formation for pastors class in seminary, and it was excellent. But one of the books that we had to read in there was an old book by Saint Gregory the Great, the Book of Pastoral Rule, and it's his commentary, if you will, on what character pastors ought to have, and how they should do their jobs and do their work, and what doing that well looks like. And so it's really old language. It's really rather abrupt. Like he's holding no punches. So I appreciate that for a number of reasons. One, it stood the test of time, right? This has been around for a very long time. But two, it breaks me out of my current mode of thinking, right? This goes back. When was St. Gregory? Like what, 800s?
I don't know. I am looking this book up as you're talking about it because I don't know this book.
Okay, so he was Pope from 590 to 604. So we're going to go back 1,500 years in church history to find out what the Pope believed the spiritual qualifications were for a church leader and how a church leader ought to act. And so,
That's powerful.
right? Just, it breaks me out of the contemporary.
I have to go ahead and read this. This sounds so important.
And so there was another author that came along not too long ago and wrote a pastoral rule for today, kind of reworking St. Gregory's thoughts into modern language and also adapting it for a modern audience. And so that's also wonderful. But so I would add those just in any other voices from church history like that we can draw on that would help give a fresh perspective, fresh for us, because it's so out of our current way of thinking, on the question at hand.
This is a good point. It is really important for us to look back and be willing to learn from other ages. And that now has gone to the top of my list. I can't wait to read that. I'm so curious.
Yeah. Be patient with yourself. You're going to run through some really old language. So
I have no doubt, but that's okay, right? Like it isn't about one of the things that my particular way of thinking makes complicated is that I don't need to rush the book that I'm on. I can just read it. It's okay. There's no due date.
Yeah.
Unless there is, because I'm in school. But normally there's no due date.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, this is awesome. I love this conversation. This conversation was not just a book review. Like I felt like we even interacted with the question itself of spiritual growth in really cool ways. So thank you for engaging in this. This was super fun.
What a blast. I love this kind of conversation. And, I would love to turn this over to the audience and just say, hey, what is the best book on spiritual formation for Christian leaders that you know of? You don't get to say the Bible, but any other book. I bet you know books that we haven't read. Maybe you're in a different tradition than we are, or maybe you've just read different things, and I would love to hear those. So please share your perspective, or if one of the books that we talked about, you're like, boy, I can't believe you talked about that book, but you didn't mention this other detail about it. Refresh our memories. Like, what is the major takeaway that you got from some of these books that we've been talking about and why you think it's an important part of the conversation? Part of why we do this is because we just believe in a broad conversation being best for everybody. And so please add to the conversation.
Yes, we would love that. But I am geared up to have another great conversation again next week.
Man, I can't wait. I'll talk to you then, okay?
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.